yeah, I can't hear. Oh. Say something?
Hey,
So yeah, I can't hear.
awesome.
Oh. So I guess like I can just click turn on
yeah,
camera. Like how's this work exactly?
All right, this is somewhat right. Now they could hear your voice, most likely.
I would hope you can hear my voice. Can you not?
Yes. All right, this I have to add a second camera source. Now I'm playing myself through my own TV. Now I have to add
geez.
another display capture of you. And then I gotta crop it. And then you gotta do this. Now this is you on the screen.
Yep.
Now you're in a perfect box. And you're gonna be up there.
All right.
All right, so fascism taking over the U.S. A very fun conversation to be having on this night. Thank you for joining me from the amazing channel, What's Bothering Me Today. It's a great theme. I love the videos.
Thank you very much. I also love your content as well. Seems way more put together. I need myself something like your little Jola subscribe sign there. That's I gotta get one, but for Bothered Boy, that'll be great.
Oh yes, that would be awesome. So yeah, Trump today revealed the 1776 Commission aimed at promoting patriotic education. So he basically said, you know, American history is being distorted through corporations, our education, and our media. We need to teach people a better vision of America. This is basically an attack on the 1619 Project, which is, I think, from the New York Times, correct? Trying to teach about the true history of America with when it comes to race. And they want to basically shut that all down. And, you know, the whole goal of this is essentially to forget American history so we could just say, you know, nothing has to get better. The goal of fascism isn't just normal conservative maintaining status quo. It's actually to take us back before the current status quo. So that's a really interesting reaction we're seeing right now. What did you think when you first saw this news?
Oh, geez. Okay. Well, when I first saw this, I immediately thought this is state propaganda. This is the stuff that America attacks Iran, North Korea, China, and Vietnam for,
I would
where
be
they
very...
say, oh no, we're going to teach you the real version of history, the one that paints the glorious revolutionary communist workers party in the best of possible lights and ignores any and all atrocities and terrible things. Now, again, I'm just a Canadian, so I don't know like a ton of American history, but I'm going to guess that the 16/9 project has to do with either Plymouth Rock or Jamestown, Virginia. Um, I'm assuming it's Virginia because True History of America, which also involves slavery, Virginia was a slave state, so that's what like my intuition is telling me.
Mhm.
And it's also kind of weird that, you know, Trump and the Americans on his side are, you know, cheering the 1776 project, which is weird because if they're saying that that's the actual start of American history, that's really weird because that negates several wars before then, and it also negates the Stamp Act that got the American Revolution rolling in 1765. So if anything, it should be the 1765 Act. But then again, I'm not expecting a lot of smarts from this crowd.
Mhm. Yeah, and oh boy, this goes so deep into what we're talking about concerning the word fascism because I see a lot of people saying like, what's the difference between, you know, Joe Biden and fascism? What's the difference between them that makes Trump a fascist but not Biden? And it is this Western civilization is being attacked. The left-wing mobs are coming to kill us and steal your children and kill God. And it's in Trump's platform. Let's teach American exceptionalism. Pretend everything was fine, fine and dandy. And he's talking right here about mobs and left-wing demonstrators tearing down our history and attacking our law enforcement, the universal symbol of the rule of law in America. It's absolutely crazy. He's talking about cancel culture. Like, it's the complete opposite of the reality. Being in American education, like, I knew nothing coming out of high school about what actually happened in American history. Like, we go through all the bad stuff that he's saying we focus too much on. We see something like the civil rights movement. We're like, well, Martin Luther King Jr. jogged down Washington with his brothers in arm, and it was all happily ever after. We were like, oh, you could vote now. Like, they gloss over history like that. And I know a lot of high school history teachers who already have such an issue with the material they're provided. They have such an issue like actually teaching what happened throughout American history. And this seems to be like really just symbolic right now. But I'm sort of scared to see what the repercussions of this are going further.
Well, yeah, because it, like, okay, I get that history is written by the victors, right? Like, Canadian history is painted in a certain light, which is why I've made several videos saying, look, some of that's true, but we also did some very dark, horrendous shit. Like, for example, Canada's own 200-year history with slavery of Black and Indigenous people is just not talked about, let alone most Canadians are aware of. Like, it's not a thing that people know about, even though it happened. And so this narrative is especially scary and during such a crazy time. But to answer your question about what separates Joe Biden from being a fascist is, for one, he's not co-opting fascism as an ideology to, like, you know, whip up his base, nor is he co-opting fascist rhetoric. You know, he's not going around saying all these people trying to tear down the greatness that is America. He's pointing out, you know, that America in many ways is great, but it can be improved upon. And that's really what patriotism should be about, is recognizing when your nation has faults. But you can say, look, there's still other things we can be proud of, but we got these faults. Let's work on those so that we can be even prouder going forward. But people like Trump and the Make America Great Again crowd, that slogan implies that America's not great, which I thought that was your whole super patriotist, patriotic and nationalist kind of thing. So that kind of doesn't make sense. And then by also trying to say, you know, it can only be the good things, they don't want to acknowledge the bad parts of history and actually fix the issues, which is only going to come back and bite the nation you love down the road. And we've seen where this road goes historically, and it's nowhere good.
Yeah, and I mean, fascism is full of contradictions. That's one of the things, I mean, things they're absolutely best at. He's attacking critical race theory a lot, and basically anything that makes Americans dig deeper into race. And he's trying to, I mean, he says about MLK at some point. I didn't actually see him say it, but I read it on here. We embrace the vision of Martin Luther King, where children are not judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And this is such a distortion. And for anyone who ever sees this, MLK was, I mean, considered today a radical socialist. He was not all about just like, oh, I don't see color. That's what people do when they don't want to be outwardly racist, but they also don't want to do anything to confront the American history of racism. When someone says, I don't see color, they are feeding into a racist cycle. And, you know, people don't understand that we need to make up for what happened in American history. They think white people taking the knife out of, black people's backs healed it somehow, and they don't want to think any deeper into it. And it all goes back to the conservative ideology of not thinking too much into things. Like, I think it's pretty accurate to say conservatives are more likely to not believe climate change is real. They don't believe addiction is a disease. They don't believe coronavirus is real. They don't believe America has done anything bad in its past. Like, these are very similar ideologies in the sense that they all reject thought. They inject intellectualism. They reject all this stuff, that it takes to make up a good nation that progresses. And, fascism, of course, the more far right you get on, a political grid, I guess, I would say, the more far right you get, the more you want to go back into history. Maintaining the current status quo isn't good enough anymore for them, because we want to give, we want to destroy hierarchies, and that's not good enough for them. They want to go back.
Well, because a lot of conservatives, and like on the surface, it's not a objectively bad thing to believe in a certain level of order or hierarchy. The problem is when those are restrictive, especially in a nation where you're ostensibly claiming to be in favor of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And to quickly go back to MLK, when he was assassinated, he was actually trying to organize another million-man march. Poverty. That was his next big thing. He wanted to address racism and civil rights, and then also what kept a lot of people down, which was poverty and class inequality. And there seems to be this idea with conservatives that it's all very tied up in legalism and the law, right? Just follow the law and nothing bad will happen to you. Good things happen to good people. It seems very rudimentary and very black and white in terms of do good things will happen, do bad things will happen, which is why they're very punitive. That's why, oh, well, if you didn't want to get pregnant, shouldn't have had premarital sex, just as like the first example that comes to mind. But I think a lot of conservatism can be summed up as it's never a problem for them until it affects them personally or someone they know. Coronavirus isn't real, and then there's like that dude in Florida or whatever who lost his wife to it, and he got sick and placed on a ventilator. Then he was, oh no, it's actually very real. Wow, yeah, we need to treat this more seriously. Like, dude, you had to get to the point where you were chronically ill and you lost your beloved wife for you to finally realize this? Like, what? It's crazy.
Yeah, that's a really depressing part of America in general, and the human species is we're very reactionary. We never prepare for things before they actually happen. But going back to what he's talking about here, it's all about the nuclear family. It's all about returning to our values. Like, if you don't understand the difference between authoritarian neoliberalism and corporatism, if you don't understand how that's different from fascism, just look at the left is coming to destroy Western civilization, or look at we have to return to our roots as a nation and make America great again, rejecting these new Marxist ideas. Like, I don't think people understand the fascist ideology in like Germany and stuff. The first people in the concentration camps were people from the left ideology, were anyone who were even what Democrats were today to the left of them. Them and to the left of them were the first people that were political prisoners in Nazi Germany. A fascist will attack them as such. They won't just do what like corporatists do now and co-opt these movements, they will attempt to crush it and turn the public against it. Fascism is a revolutionary ideology that needs culture war to survive. And of course, our system right now is running us in America into a very crammed space where we're like, okay, either we vote third party and let fascism have a better chance of beating neoliberal corporatism, or we go into neoliberal corporatism again, which feeds into more fascism and feeds into a more revolutionary ideology. And the reason that's an issue is because this country has been throughout its entire history ready to fall down on the right side. It's always been right-leaning. It's waiting for that catalyst to say, okay, we're going to have a full fascist takeover. I don't know how it hasn't happened yet. I guess when material conditions degraded after the Great Depression, there were enough people working with the elite class in society, which was like FDR, to ensure it was a New Deal that rose up instead of a right-wing, right-wing system. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but
kind of. So good point about concentration camps, because the very first concentration camp in Weimar/Nazi Germany, it was in 1933, and it was in the Thuringian village of Nora, and it was designed to house political prisoners who were communists. Communists, socialists, these were the first people that they came for. They came for whoever could be an effective and organized legal opposition to their regime, which is why fascism never starts with an external enemy. They always have them, like, the invading hordes and the caravans on your southern border. Oh, there's always an external threat, which is why you need to justify the police state and the military-industrial complex. But the first, and like they'll sort of test out some camps and stuff like that, but the first enemy that they always want and have to deal with is an internal enemy, which is why we're seeing a lot of activists, whether they're BLM, alleged, the Antifa ghosts that are, sinking boats in Texas and causing forest fires. This is who they have to create as a boogeyman so that they can get people scared enough to justify blatant human rights abuses against their fellow citizens in what is supposedly the greatest country on earth and the land of the free. So that's why I'm very scared for a lot of the activists in America right now and other leftists, because the police have lists, and you're probably on one of those lists. And if they're sharing them with militias and working with them, which, based on several reports recently, that's the level of fascism you guys are at down there, that's fucking scary. So people need to start behaving like the French resistance at this point, because it's not going to get better in November. Trump's not going to go quietly into the night. He's either going to try and rig it or refuse to concede, or a combination of the two. He's also made noise about like a third term. It's not a good scene, man. It's scary.
yeah, and it always takes, no thinking, no actual ideology. It takes no policy. It takes everything that has to do with theatrics, and that's why businessmen fall into that role. That's why Hitler did, because he was a showman. All these people that are focused around, where Trump came from reality television, Reagan, they're going to do great with fascism. Reagan was, the earliest example I could remember, like in modern history, of a, blatant fascist. The Reagan Revolution screwed up our entire political spectrum for the past 40 years.
Yeah, tell me about it.
Yeah, that was like, imagine, oh my goodness, if Carter would have won again, that would have been something else. But Reagan won by convincing Americans there was a huge problem that had to be dealt with. More Americans sided with Jimmy Carter when it comes to the issues. But Reagan was able to convince there was a huge issue with law and order. Although right now, if you look at the main issues for each voter, Democrats, all the main issues are healthcare, the economy, stuff like that, foreign deals and all that, trade deals. But the Trump supporters' ideological bracket was all around crime and law and order. But if you look at crime stats over the past 30 years, they have gone consistently down. Right after Rodney King happened and pressure came to reform police, literally you could look up the graphs for FBI crime statistics. Right when police were pressured to reform after Rodney King, it went dipping down. It went spiraling down. They always accredit that to Bill Clinton's assault rifle ban, but I think it aligns much more with public pressure to maintain good policing during that time. So right now, it's so irrational to be worrying about crime, and it's all people that are from suburbs that are, and this is the white identity that Nixon and Reagan kicked up. They're all from the suburbs. They're from where I'm from, which is a small rural community. Yeah, and they really don't get what what the actual issues are. They could have half of their possessions stolen, but if they're told it's to help the police state and they're told it's to get rid of radical leftists, they will be 100% okay with that. I'll be right back. I'm gonna go shut my fan off.
All right, no worries. But yeah, like I'm gonna go on a little bit of a Reagan rant, and Benjamin Beckwith in chat pointed out that Reagan was also involved in the delays of hostages. I'm assuming you're talking about the Iranian hostages until after inauguration. That is partly because the Iranians didn't want to give Jimmy Carter the satisfaction. And to go back to like the whole use of slogans and fear, in the 70s, it was a pretty rough time for America all around. And Jimmy Carter rather infamously said that it was a crisis of character. He basically called out the American people, saying, "Oh, well, it's not really anyone's fault, but the Americans just need to have a bit more confidence and not go into fear." And Reagan, admittedly, beautifully exploited this by saying, "It's morning in America again." That was his thing, of the darkness of Carter and the Iranian Revolution and all the terrible things that have happened in Watergate and the economic malaise of the 70s and the gas crisis. Like, it's morning in America. The night has passed into the bright new dawn of the 80s with me, the old smiling Gipper who absolutely hates gay people and minorities. Aren't you just so happy and proud to be an American again? He couches all this neoliberal dogma and terrible policy in this grandfatherly, wise figure, which is part of why a lot of people have also tried to sort of craft this image around Trump of the law and order president. He tells it like it is. He's a straight shooter, even though the man is a notorious shyster, doesn't know what he's doing, has left the State Department and the White House in complete shambles. But so long as there is this media or propaganda machine around him that can spin it to make him look good as the law and order guy or the straight shooter, the common sense guy, that resonates so well with conservatives in like Lincoln, Nebraska, who are afraid of Antifa coming out to their rural property. It's so wild.
Yeah, it's literally saying to people, watch out. If we do this too much, the black people are going to move into your neighborhood. Like, it's literally the same ideology repeating throughout history. And it's amazing that we're still at this point. But if you really look at the knowledge base of regular Americans, I mean, what do they really know about anything? Like, we know in political science that Americans don't know what's best for them. They almost never vote towards their interests. I mean, unless if they're lining up along party lines and they get lucky, but they never like switch their vote based on interest. It's all about flash. It's all about what is, the emotional movement right now. And that's what concerns me so much, like you were saying with America today, with social media and all that. Propaganda on social media is literally like designed for fascism. We see all these right-wing movements happening throughout the world. It's so easy to coordinate right now. And I know people, I don't agree with how the Democrats present all the Russia stuff either, but it's just it's commonplace. Our country does it. Russia does it. All the countries influence other elections. And it's easy to do that. It's easy to influence people within your own country. And with enough people manipulated, I'm not sure if this is going to actually happen. This is like a far-fetched idea that I get when I'm getting like freaked out by seeing stuff online. But if there was some type of like people's coup, like a fascist coup, I don't know what would happen. If Trump lost on election day and he told all his supporters, your democracy is being stolen from you. If you don't come and stand up for it right now and charge the Capitol to keep me in office, all of you are dead. And I think Donald Trump's narcissism has no boundaries. And that's what makes him so scary as an authoritarian leader. People always say, what happens if there's a smart fascist that comes eventually. I don't know if a smart fascist would even be this effective because the idea of him being so stupid allows him to do so many crazy batshit things that I think he could spiral uncontrollably to the point where even we can't imagine after everything that already went down.
Right. Geez, now I'm really thinking though, like, A, is there such a thing as a smart fascist? And B, could they even come to these levels of Trump fuckery? And I'm really struggling with that. But what I could definitely see happening, as you pointed out on election day, I won't concede. This is clearly a hit job. I can see him doing what he did in the Midwest, where he called on his supporters to liberate the state capitals of like Michigan and like Wisconsin and stuff like that, trying to literally get armed vigilantes and militias to use force to like seize something, whether it's power, concessions from the government, something like that. So I can totally see him using the red states and his supporters in blue states to like, no, come on, rise up. It's time, brave Americans, for a second American revolution. You got to storm Washington, D.C. And that's probably how a second civil war happens, which is not going to be fun. And I hope it doesn't happen, but like we've already seen, there's a previous impetus. These people are willing and apparently able to just show up into your state legislatures with guns. Like this is so wild to me as a foreigner.
Yeah. And I kind of want to make this into a separate segment and clip it out for my channel, the post after. But there's a big difference between what is required for a fascist revolution versus a socialist revolution. In order to have a socialist revolution, you need material conditions to degrade to a certain point. But a fascist revolution can happen, I mean, within those circumstances as well. But you need to have that immense propaganda control, that propaganda machine working as well. And you need to have the government and corporations working with the same interests for fascism to happen, which is why with Mussolini.
It's happening right now.
Yeah, 100%. And Mussolini, when he first got, I think, elected in 1919, I think, he ran initially as a lefty. And his first year in office was amazing for people. They loved it. He ran on a platform that looked more left than Bernie Sanders is today. But after a year in office, his ideology began to switch. And the ruling class of that society looked at the conditions, and they saw that society was about to degrade. And they had the choice to either let a socialist revolution happen or co-opt Mussolini and shift it to fascism. So the elites in that society ended up saying, all right, there's going to be a revolution of some sort. So we're not going to let socialism happen because that threatens our material condition. That lets the workers rise up and take control of the means of production. So we would rather Mussolini, and they convinced him, and it was a great strategy as trying to be a dictator. We're going to push him to the right and make the whole society topple down to the right. So in America right now, with such a capitalistic country, we would need such immense support if we wanted to have a left control of anything, even the Democratic Party at this point, because of that influence. In the end of the day, it is true elites do control our society. And in America, I don't think there's any way in hell, if there is a revolution of some sort, I don't think there's any way in hell the elites will let it be on the left. Do you agree with that?
Pretty much. To expand on what you're saying, which is why I did like the sort of like finger wag of, oh yeah, really good point, was funnily enough, Mussolini originally started, I believe, in the Communist or the Socialist Party of Italy. But they initially didn't really like a lot of his ideas, and they found him to be, guess what, something of a narcissist who thought he knew better than everyone else. And so they promptly kicked him out of the party. So he left and he said, well, screw you, Cazzo. I'm going to start my own party with blackjack and hookers. And that's how the Italian Fascist Party started. And one of the other things that's not talked about enough in studying the rise of fascism in Europe was that they always feared the left, and they always thought that whoever the fascist was, because they were popular or they had rising popularity, they thought that they could then control them. So in Weimar Germany, because they had gotten rid of the Kaiser like a decade or two earlier, they thought, well, you know what, this Hitler guy, he still only has a majority. Herr Hindenburg, who's currently the Chancellor of Germany, he can keep him in line. It should be fine. But the communists, the German communists, oh, we don't want that. And it's the same story in Italy, where the communists and socialists looked ready to form a kind of coalition left-wing government. And the king of Italy, King Emmanuel, he thought that if they got in because they were against the monarchy, they were going to start a revolution and kick him out. Whereas Mussolini said, oh no, I want to keep the king and this classic Italian stuff. It's part of our heritage and our history. And so the king said, all right, cool, you get to be in charge now. And then by the time he amassed too much power, and the king said, hey, can you maybe not do some of these horrendous things? Mussolini said, no, screw you, I'm in charge now, basically. And this also happened in other areas that eventually had fascist governments take over, like Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania. These other nations had either kings or they had republics that were scared of encroaching communist and socialist or Marxist-Leninist influence, and they saw the fascists as the best option that they had of maintaining the status quo. And that's a dangerous thing when we apply that thinking to where we are in America right now. Democrats and Republicans are two sides of the same coin, which is why I'm increasingly convinced that the Democrats just want Biden to lose, because they think, oh yeah, Trump says that, but then things will be so bad in 4 years that we're sure to win, or something to that effect. Or they think that people are so done already that they're going to vote Biden, and they think that Trump isn't going to rig it, when I'm pretty sure he is. And either way, the elites who back these parties in the military-industrial complex, they're going to ensure that they themselves and their little neoliberal order that they've built and cultivated over the past 40 years, they are going to do everything they can to hold on to that power. And if that means letting Trump rig an election or go for a third term or calling his supporters to keep him in power for longer, so long as that maintains their order and that's in their monetary interest, that's going to happen. Which is all the more reason why more people need to be aware of that and how that's a crucial part of how fascism rises in a country.
Yeah, it's all about the ruling class making whatever decisions they think can keep them up top. So at this point in history, what does that? I think having labor tied to productivity is one of the things that keeps our society functioning and keeps them at
Mm-hmm.
our, they keep at our discretion. It allows a general strike to still be possible. It allows some sort of class movement. The biggest thing that's concerning me about moving on to the future is the idea that automation could displace so much about what's happening concerning labor that if the lower classes are no longer necessary for their societies to function, I don't think they care what happens after that. Because if they use, now this is like a deep theory I've made up, if they use capitalism to produce to the point where labor is no longer needed, they no longer need to, have the workers at all. And at that point in a robotic society, that we aren't going to be there for another 10 to 15 years, because technology accelerates so fast, and due to COVID, so many jobs are getting automated early. So that's my big theory about the future. If we don't find some way to make sure, oh boy, I know a lot of people like the UBI, but even that disconnects our labor from productivity. Do you see what I mean? Like how dangerous this is about to get? Because once we lose that, once we lose our labor on our side, there's nothing we have. We have no power, we have no money, we have no influence. There's no reason they wouldn't just let us fizzle out if they wanted to.
Yeah, that's a really good point to touch on, because AOC a while ago said a really good quote about how we should, under normal or more ideal circumstances, we should be excited by automation because that liberates humans to do more fruitful things, volunteer, pursue their passions, be with people. But because we live in a capitalist society, that instead means, oh, geez, I need to find new work of some kind. And some people say, well, just get retrained to be like a coder or an AI technician or a robotics technician. And it's kind of like, again, that would sort of be ideal, but then who's going to pay for that if you've gotten rid of a lot of the jobs and people can't work? Now, some people are dealing with this in various different ways. There's UBI. There's people calling for workers to have a greater say and participation and reward from, say, company profits. There's this thing happening in Canada right now where gig economy workers are actually potentially getting the right to unionize. So, there's lots of different things that people are proposing and that are starting to happen. But automation should ideally be a good thing. But under a capitalist system, it's not, because they're pursuing profit, which means they're going after any jobs where they can get rid of people, which is why we're seeing so much advancement in self-driving technology. Because if you don't need to pay delivery drivers, courier drivers, truckers, and stuff can get there faster via, say, automated drone or by a self-driving truck or rover of some kind, then that saves you time and ultimately money, which is what capitalists are all about. So we need to have this discussion of how we take care of society. And the problem is that conservatives don't care about society. They care about a close group of people. They care about themselves and like their family. It's kind of like this fuck you, I got mine attitude, as opposed to, hey, maybe if we took care of society at large, things would be better. Because the times that America has actually been at its greatest have been when Americans took care of other Americans.
Yeah, that is very true. And considering what's happening into the future, I've been looking into neo-feudalism lately and how much what's happening right now is
We're already there.
so compare. Yeah, everything happening now is basically feudalism all over again. And I never even connected those 2 points before, but it really is. We have the lords of society. We have people operating society. They are the ruling class. They're the elite. They're the wealthy. They're the people controlling everything. Every business owner is just at the bottom. They're serving them at some point in the hierarchy. We're at that point again, and that's why I started looking into like worker co-ops a lot more, democratizing the workplace. And I'm not like I don't consider myself a socialist, but I am looking into that, socialist theory, things like worker co-ops, things like democracy wherever you can get it, because we really do need democracy wherever we can achieve that at, and that means having a lot of people in these grassroots organizations. That means having people helping count votes. That means having progressives volunteering within the DNC and the is it NDP in Canada. It means having anyone you could have that is pure in this system to make sure it's not as corrupt as possible. And yeah, conservatism leads to a fortress mentality, hide behind the walls, and it's opposite. We need collectivism right now. I mean, I think capitalism and markets in general, if you talk about like market socialism, it's great for production, but it's terrible for deciding on who gets it and who has power in it.
That reminded me of something. I'm seeing if I can find it right now fairly quickly, but it was this interesting, it's kind of called like a new model of how a community can invest in itself under a certain model. I'm just trying to find what it's called. But basically the general idea, I don't know if you're familiar with syndicalism at all. It's kind of like a subset of left-wing philosophy, and it largely involves worker co-ops and like democratic labor organizations that form the basis of worker councils that then determine how they interact with everyone else. So you would have a science syndicate, a automotive makers syndicate, a syndicate of hospital workers, etc. And in really poor parts of Ohio, where they've seen a loss of industry, but they still have what they are calling anchor institutions. Now, what this approach is not syndicalism, but it's basically kind of like syndicalism with extra steps. And the idea is that anchor institutions like schools and hospitals would try and hire from local communities, which would also like that way they work in these sort of localized areas. And then yeah, I found it here, the Cleveland model. I was, for some reason I was thinking like Scranton or Columbus, but it's the Cleveland model. So the idea is that this is how they hope to benefit a lot of low income neighborhoods. And different sort of groups. And the idea is like your anchor institutions of hospitals and schools. They purchase goods and services from local businesses, community gardens, local factories, and those local worker cooperatives, like that's what they want them to be, are worker cooperatives, whether they're, a mom and pop business or a factory, a shop, a garage, some farms. Those hire residents of the surrounding community, and people from the surrounding community also serve in the municipal government, and the municipal government partners on economic development with a nonprofit corporation, and the nonprofit corporation finances and assists the worker cooperatives, and the anchor institutions of like schools and hospitals make investments of patient capital in nonprofit corporations and the surrounding community. I just found a picture here. I'm just going to post it in your Discord. But it's really a fascinating model of how to create a robust local community network that can sustain and employ itself, which in a way, like I said, is kind of like syndicalism with extra steps, but it's not quite classic syndicalism. If you have any like Marxist Leninists here, they're probably raging at me in the chat. But I think it's a really good idea that can allow for a greater local cohesion and therefore community cohesion, which could hopefully ultimately help people realize there's a better way of doing things, and that community is better than some kind of other, because we're all in this together, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think what matters, I mean, we could all debate on what is the best form of it, but what matters is democracy everywhere, just taking down, wherever we can. Even when it comes to like a parliamentary system or the House of Representatives in the U.S. right now, back when it was first created, there was one House member for every 40,000 people in the population. Now it's one House member for like every 170,000 people. If we had the same proportion of House members in the U.S. as we did when the country when it was founded, we would have 9,000 House members in the U.S. And I think expanding that is a very important thing, because you want to have it delegated, as far as you can have it. You want to have as many pieces in the system as possible, because, I mean, it's just the fundamental property of government in general. The less pieces you have in any system is going to be easier to corrupt. It's just how it is. So we need to look for, like you said, I heard a little bit about syndicalism. I'm not big into the terminology of all this stuff. I started watching a couple like YouTube debaters.
Fine.
They use all these big words. I'm like, okay, I have to learn what these are now. And then when I talk to like regular people, I have to remember not to use these big words anymore, because like people have no idea what I'm like. If I say syndicalism to a random person on the street, like, and
Yeah, they're not gonna know, right?
I have to learn how to turn that off and shut it off as well. Like, turn it up and down when we're like talking about it. But another thing that happened this week, and I saw you made a video on it. I didn't watch your video on it yet though. But it's what's happening with eugenics. God forbid, freaking eugenics again at the border. So what did you say in your video about that?
So basically, a whistleblower has come forth from an ICE detention facility, pointing out that at least one doctor, if not several, have been performing mass hysterectomies on migrant women there in the detention center. And for those unaware, a hysterectomy is where you remove either all or part of the uterus. Usually it's done to prevent pregnancy from happening. It's also done to remove ovarian cysts. So if you have like ovarian cancer, for instance, the appropriate surgery is a hysterectomy. Of course, this leaves women infertile. And by deliberately doing this on migrant women, it is a form of genocide according to Article 2 of the United Nations Declaration on like human rights and trafficking and genocide and stuff like that. And it's so wild that I have to say, to some people who say, oh, it's not genocide, you're overreacting. Someone said that in my comment section, and I pointed out it absolutely is genocide. Another form of genocide is when you remove the children from a targeted religious, ethnic, or racial group and you disperse them to another group. oh, guess what? Separating children at the border and then throwing them into the American foster care system, that's a form of genocide according to the UN. But the whole mass hysterectomy thing is crazy because in the vast majority of those cases, it's probably not necessary. And especially since it was also revealed, and this part has gone under the radar, um, there were also a lot of COVID outbreaks at this detention facility as well as others. And they're either falsifying medical records or they are deliberately shredding them and pretending like the problem doesn't exist. That's another form of genocide, is creating conditions that allow for the destruction in whole or in part of the targeted group. No matter how you slice it, what they've been doing, it is genocide on the southern US border. And I hate that I can say that, and it's not hyperbolic. Like, oh, God.
Yeah, and for people who will look at this and say, oh, they're illegal anyway, they're trying to cross the border, that's not how it works.
It's not a crime to seek asylum.
There's a legal process for asylum. You're supposed to come into the country, you go to a courthouse or whatever, and the United States gives you a temporary visa, and you go through an asylum process, and then, humanely, they decide if they're going to keep you in asylum or if they're going to send you back. What they're doing at these concentration camps is holding them in legal limbo where they have no chance to face the legal process for asylum. So yes, it is putting innocent people in concentration camps. There is a legal way to seek asylum, and they are trying to follow it, but the United States is not letting them do it, and instead they are committing a form of genocide. It's 100% what's happening. I don't think people know that or realize that about the border. These aren't just a bunch of people. They aren't just a bunch of rapists and Mexicans trying to get over the border, trying to come over and kill our families and take our culture and take our jobs or whatever. These are actual people fleeing from dire conditions, going through a proper legal process, and you are not allowing it to happen, being a conservative in this country, and you are supporting it because they're illegal or whatever. You know, it's absolutely disgusting what's going on right now. And I mean, do you think people actually know that? Because I don't think they understand that concept.
Well, here's the thing, and this is kind of terrifying. I think people do know this, but they make these weird justifications in their head for why it doesn't matter. So in that video that you mentioned that I did over on my channel, there is one person there who left a comment that basically amounted to, well, that's what they get for trying to enter illegally and ruin my country and my country's way of life. It's like they're seeking to join your country and your culture and seek better for themselves and their families. Like we had a similar kind of problem when Canada was first planning to accept like 40,000 Syrian refugees, which under normal circumstances is like a fifth or a sixth of our annual immigration intake. And we said, yeah, we'll take all that just right now. And people tried to do the whole, oh, it's a security threat. Some of them could be ISIS and, you know, create terror attacks. It's going to be rampant poverty, etc. And then they've come here, and you want to know what they've done? They've invented and patented new things. They've opened businesses, and they've added to like not only the like cultural and ethnic diversity of a place, but the economic diversity. There was a family from like Damascus or something. They were traditional chocolatiers, and they opened a Syrian chocolate shop in like this tiny little town in Nova Scotia. And everyone's like, oh yeah, no, we love the Al Hashim family. They're great. You know, they're joining scouts, cadet organizations. They're going to school. When we had natural disasters, they were among the first in line to say, oh, how can we help? We have only a little bit of money. Can we send that? How do we send like possessions? Do they need food? We can make food and send it. Like, they understand what it means to lose everything, and to be welcomed with open arms into another nation has made so many of the Syrian refugees incredibly grateful. And as another sort of side note to this, back after the American-Vietnam War, when you guys pulled out, there was all the Vietnamese boat people, and that became a huge refugee crisis. Canada took in a bunch, especially my city, and because of that, our city now has this massive Vietnamese community. And guess who were some of the first to speak up for the Syrians and offer to privately sponsor them and their families to bring them here to our city and resettle them? It was the Vietnamese Canadian community paying it forward. These people are not threats. They will only, for the vast majority of them, they will only add to your nation, your economy, your people, your tax bracket. Like, it's overwhelming benefit for very little risk and investment overall. And instead, they're creating this artificial problem on the border where they're saying, look, there's so many that we have to process because, like you said, they're keeping them in legal limbo. So, oh, look, we have too many. That's why you need to give Customs and Border Protection or Border Patrol asylum. It'd be fine. Oh,
All right, you were out of the video for like a second, but it's okay. Continuing on your points. When it comes to like crime in the U.S., undocumented immigrants and asylum seekers, on average, commit less crime than an average American citizen. And all they do is add economic value to the countries they go to. There wouldn't be a trade of labor if it didn't benefit the GDP of a country. And I think it's insane for people to think there would be. A trade of labor is an economic trade if you're talking about that. And it should be more humane, and we are doing a really bang up job with it, and it's just getting worse and worse. And I know people bring up like Obama and stuff, they were doing it too. Yeah, okay, it was accelerated under Trump. It is something that neoliberals and fascists will do. But at this point, I think it matters how much of your country hears about it and is happy about it. When it comes to that, when you have a major political party where 95% of those people will hear that news, or a crazy number will hear the news that they are committing hysterectomies on this many women who are innocent, and they'll say it's okay. Like, it's absolutely scary at that point.
Because of that conservative mentality, right? Of, oh, well, they did something wrong because they're entering illegally. Therefore, this is the righteous punishment that you deserve, right? It's always very punitive with these people. And then there are some who would say, oh, well, you see, like, we're taking care of them at the border, feeding them, clothing them, and they're not doing anything. They're just sitting there. My tax dollars pay for that. And so they get mad and they just justify it. It's so mind-boggling.
Yeah, it's really that meme of the elite class person and the working class person. They're sitting at a table, and the elite has all the cookies on his plate, and the working class person has one cookie, and the elite's like, "Hey, look, he's gonna come steal your cookie." And even that meme, to that extent, is so, like, even the point that's trying to make doesn't make a clear enough point to how much people are turned against people with their same class interests. When it comes to like a working class white person, they don't understand that a working class person of any color, of any background, is sharing their same struggle. They will relate more with Donald Trump and everything before they'll relate with an actual working class person, and that's it's unfortunate, but it's where we are.
Like, people are 6 bad months away from being homeless, and those same people are not 6 good months away from being a billionaire. Like, it's this simping for capitalists and billionaires makes no sense. Your average American has far more in common with the homeless person on the street downtown than they do with people like Elon Musk or Mitch McConnell. It's that simple.
Yeah, but if you watch Joe Rogan, then I feel like that's a stereotypical show for a lot of people who think they're going to be millionaires tomorrow. It is Joe Rogan. You listen to it like, oh, look at these 2 grown men having a discussion where they're not yelling. This is so intellectual. I'm going to be successful someday too. And it's a crazy mentality, and people will literally just be like, you know what? All these hardships I'm going against because I'm a working class person, I deserve it. I mean, if you just work hard, you're going to be a millionaire. If you complain about anything about this country at all, then you hate the country. If you complain about law enforcement, if you say it needs to be reformed, you hate law enforcement. It's always the extreme of this ideology. And I think we're closing in on an hour now. But thank you for joining me. Can you talk about your channel for a second?
Yeah, sure, I guess. So, hi, everyone. I run the channel What's Bothering Me Today. And on Twitter, I use the handle Bothered Boy. I'm trying to upload daily. So far, I've still done that. I'm Canadian, so the channel is largely Canadian focused. But as you see here, it's kind of like also got to talk about our neighbor America a lot of the time. I also talk about some international issues as well. Sometimes do fun, well, like fun things of like something else that's bothering me today, like people who don't use their turn signal. But it's mostly political news and like social issue based, and through a Canadian left wing lens. So I'm on YouTube, I'm on Twitter. Probably going to start Twitch once I finally get to 1,000 subscribers. Going to do a live stream Q&A, and I think that pretty much wraps it up for me. I'm new at this, so I'm terrible at it. And I also want to say, thank you, Jola, for inviting me on here last minute, talking about some real heavy shit. Let's hope that things can start to turn around, that Trump is tossed in November, and that ultimately, even if it takes a few years, that things work out. And again, thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, definitely. Whenever you want to do this, I enjoy doing conversations like this so much more than making videos. Like I hate talking with me and a camera. I just don't like it. So I love, whenever you're down to do something like this, I definitely want to do it. Thank you for everyone who is watching this.
Sure, man. Hit me up.
I'll try to post more consistently, but no promises. Hopefully you look at the world tomorrow and it's a little bit brighter than it was today. Have a good night.
Night.
All right.